Gurman, you better be right on this one, because I think overall I have to put my vote down on the only thing that I'm really interested in Apple releasing this year, which is a refresh with a higher refresh Pro Display XDR, fixing the biggest problem Apple has running with it. Let's begin. So obviously, I don't think most people have much of a design issue with the Pro Display XDR. It looks pretty freaking cool. The bezels are thin, you know, the cheese grater design on the back is a little different from what we're used to, but hey, if people want to grate cheese with the reference monitors, that's up to them. Even the Pro stand in itself is not a bad design. In fact, it's kind of like inherently and uniquely Apple to go completely overkill on like a magnetic attachment that you will literally use once in your entire life and then never again. Yeah, it's those kinds of details Johnny Ive loves to dwell on. But Johnny Ive is gone now, and as we've seen, Apple has kind of gone in a different direction against the Johnny Ive grain of always making things simple and smaller and more elegant and more minimal. Now they're like, yeah, let's make the MacBooks beefy, let's throw in some old ports because some people might actually use them. I'm hoping that same mindset can be applied to the Pro Display in 2022. It makes perfect sense to refresh it alongside the Apple Silicon Mac Pro, which fairly reliable leaker Tim Cook is saying to expect this transition to be complete by the end of 2022. So I assume that means we're getting a new Pro Display of some kind, and Mark Gurman came forward in his latest Power On newsletter saying that it's destined to be around half the price of the previous Pro Display. So obviously there's a few different ways to interpret that. If just the panel itself is half the price, that would mean $2,500, which honestly is still quite a bit, but if you consider that the display specifications would basically be leading class, you know, if it's a mini LED panel, which Apple is trying to ramp up production of already, and they've introduced 120Hz mini LED panels across MacBook Pros and iPad Pros, it's only logical that Apple would also bring 120Hz to the mini LED iMac Pro and the inevitable Pro Display XDR refresh. That way we can have some more consistency with this buttery smooth ecosystem, which, may I just say, so thankful Apple's catering to this demographic, because I've been using the 16-inch MacBook Pro, you know, ever since it came out, and I love it. The M1 Max is extremely powerful, and the battery life is the best in any laptop I've ever seen. It's a fantastic machine. I think the only slight criticism I have, which is a fair bit of a fundamental issue, is just that 16-inch display is quite a lot smaller than what I'm used to with my 27-inch iMac Pro. You know, I've been editing off of that for almost 4 years, so I kind of got comfortable having a big screen desktop, and that does not mean that I would rather have an iMac Pro, because again, we're taking a lot of trips. I'm going to be taking this MacBook Pro with me out of state so that hopefully I can get some work done for you guys and post content when I'm not at home. So a laptop is helpful, and it's much easier to turn a laptop into a desktop than it is turn a desktop into a laptop, although Marquez somehow made it work. I basically want all of the insane power I have with my MacBook Pro to be mobile, but be able to easily dock it with an external display that's much bigger so that I can have that flexibility of screen real estate, especially when live streaming, you know, you're monitoring OBS and the chat and all that. Having a big screen is immensely helpful for when you're multitasking as often as I am. So doing everything off of the 16-inch display feels a bit crammed. So yes, I am potentially in the market for this refreshed display whenever it comes out, but it's absolutely going to depend on how Apple prices it, you know? I want to put limits and say I wouldn't spend more than a certain amount because I've already spent an absurd amount on my MacBook Pro, but if Apple is actively able to get the display panel itself to $2,500, and hopefully it actually includes some kind of free basic stand. Whatever stand you're shipping with the 24-inch iMac would be fine, frankly. Just include that by default, and if people want a Pro stand, you know, Apple, you could probably just keep selling the same $1,000 Pro stand and have this updated Pro Display use the same magnetic attachment on the back. That way everybody who blew chunks of their savings on the Pro Display XDR in 2019, they can just pull off that useless crappy LCD, throw it in the garbage, and then put on the new mini LED panel and reuse, you know, the most important part of the entire display, which is of course the Pro stand that allows you to adjust the height and rotate it 90 degrees, because lots of people do that, right? I mean, I can count on one nose how many Pro Display XDRs I've actually seen people use in portrait mode, and I'm so thankful Apple prioritized that feature with the Pro stand. Apple, you can keep selling your crazy Pro stands as long as something comes with it, and I think my limit for, you know, a 32-inch, and I would even settle with a 27-inch 27-inch external monitor that's 120 hertz and mini LED. Also, another great perk that I love about Apple's monitors in the past is that they could also charge my MacBook as they're outputting a video signal. That way I can just have one cable doing the power and video. Oh, that would be so clean. But I think $3,000 is basically my limit. And I feel like I'm not asking for too much, Apple. I'm basically saying that as long as you keep it under $3,000, I'd be interested, and I think it'd be worth reviewing for the channel at least, but also something that might fit into my workflow fairly well. But if it's a penny over $3,000, I'm gonna have a much harder time deciding what I'm gonna do for my desktop setup. Probably gonna go third party. Maybe LG Ultrafine will have some decent options by then with higher refresh rate. But despite what a lot of people say about 120 hertz, I notice it immensely, and every time I turn on my iMac Pro to access old files or watch a YouTube video as I'm working, I instantly pick up on the 60 hertz, just because I'm now like spoiled with having 120 hertz on my phone, my iPad, and my laptop. So as soon as it's not there, I'm like, ew, you're broken, you're so cheap. So that's why I do have standards, and yes, that's why even if I had all the money in the world, I wouldn't buy a Pro Display XDR, even if it was $6,000, even if it was $2,000, wouldn't really matter because it would still be 60 hertz, you know, it's still a good looking monitor, but I want to hook up my MacBook Pro to something bigger that doesn't have to compromise on any of the great specs that that display offers. So I hope Gurman ends up being correct about this. $2,500 does sound like a decent sweet spot for me, but of course, if Apple could go lower, you know, that would be great as well. It's also ridiculous when you fathom that the new iMac Pro coming out in a couple months will probably be a 27-inch mini LED 120 hertz display, and they'll sell that whole thing with the computer and the M1 Pro and M1 Max inside it for probably $2,200, $2,300, and then if you want it just slightly bigger to 32 inches, that's $2,500, and there's not even a computer. Probably no speakers or webcam either. Thanks, Apple. Never change. Either way, let me know what you guys think is a fair price for these monitors, and try to be a tad more creative than just, yeah, I think it should be under $1,000 because I have seen an Amazon monitor that was $400. Think about the chassis. It's gotta be aluminum, it's gotta be recyclable, and Apple's gonna be Apple about it. So try to be a tad realistic. This is your Apple Shape here. I'll see you all in the next one.